I want to find the values of X and Y, knowing that these pentagons are similar. So what I like to do when I'm giving notes is I like to annotate my notes. So I like to write down a description of what I'm doing along with what I'm doing, so that when I look back at my notes later, I know what I was doing. Because sometimes it can be easy to get lost in the math a little bit. So I recommend, as you guys are copying down your right side notes, that you don't just copy down the work I do, but also copy down my annotations. So here's what I mean by an annotation. So I wrote step 1. I'm going to figure out which sides correspond, and then I'm going to highlight them. So when we talk about corresponding sides, we always want to make sure that we are matching up the sides that go together. So the shortest side goes with the shortest side, and the longest one goes with the longest one. And sometimes it's easiest to tell by just kind of looking at the shape. So if I'm looking at these two shapes, and I'm looking at this length right here that I just highlighted in yellow, it is next to that indented portion of it, but it's the smaller one next to the indented portion. So in my other shape, I'm gonna highlight 24 with yellow because that's the smaller one next to the indented part. Y is across from this indent. So I am going to highlight that in green, and then I'm gonna highlight in green on the other shape the side that's across from that indent, and that would be this one, 18. And then 11 is going to go with X. So my first step is to match up the sides. In this case, my two shapes are in the same orientation, but they might be spun around, they might be mirror images of each other. So you can't always just say, the side on the left will go with the side on the left, and the side on the right will go with the side on the right. That's why you want to kind of look and see what are the shorter values, the longer values, you know, what's across from the 90-degree angle or across from the indent, things like that, that'll help you match them up. Okay, so now if I'm looking at this shape, I see that of the three sides, I have values in my two shapes. So I'm going to call this my red shape, and I'm going to call this one my blue shape. So I notice that in my red shape and my blue shape, I've got values for the yellow highlighted side, 8 and 24. But in the other highlighted sides, I've got a variable and a value, and a value and a variable. All right, well, I can look at the side length that has the two values in it to try to figure out my scale factor or my zoom factor. So if I look at this, I see that as I'm going from my red shape to my blue shape, I went from 8 to 24. And I know that with similar shapes, you're always multiplying to go from one shape to the other. So that means that I am multiplying by 3 to go from 8 to 24. So that means that 3 is going to be my scale factor. So I can use that scale factor to help me figure out the other sides. So like if I'm going from 11 to X, I would do 11 times 3 to get my value of X. If I'm going from Y to 18, I would do Y times 3 equals 18 to help me find my value of Y. But sometimes it's not so easy to look and see what the zoom factor or the scale factor is. Like if I was going from 8 to 27, I might not be able to see really closely what that scale factor is. So in that case, we're going to work on setting up a proportion to help you figure out what the zoom factor is, or to help you solve for a missing side. Okay, so now we know what our answers should be for X and Y, then that'll help us figure out if we're setting up our proportions correctly. Okay, so step 2 is to write your proportion. A proportion is just an equation where you have one fraction or one ratio equal to another fraction or ratio. A ratio is just a fraction. So I am going to set up my proportion, and the corresponding sides are going to go together in the ratio. So let's start by solving for X. So I'm going to write X and the top of my fraction, because I always like to have variables in the top of my fraction if I can. And the corresponding side that goes with X is 11. So those were both highlighted in blue. So I put my problems or my numbers and my variables together into one fraction, and I highlighted that in blue, so I know that I'm talking about my blue sides. And then I've got my yellow sides, 8 and 24. Now X is in my blue shape, so I need to do the value from my blue shape in the top because I want the numbers in the top of both to come from the same shape. So these are from the same shape. They're from the blue shape. And I want the numbers in the bottom of my fraction to come from the same shape. So 11 was in my red shape, so I'm going to put 8. So that also comes from the same shape. And you can see here that my 24 and 8, those were from what I highlighted in yellow. So you put your corresponding sides together in a fraction equal to another pair of corresponding sides in the fraction. And you want to make sure that you're choosing a pair of sides that has 2 numbers rather than a second variable, because you won't be able to solve that. All right, step 3, solve for X. And here's a reminder for you guys. When you are solving and you have a fraction is just dividing. It's just division. So if I want to get rid of dividing by 11, I can get rid of dividing by 11 by multiplying, because multiplying undoes dividing. And just a reminder, when I am multiplying a whole number times a fraction, I'm really just multiplying the top, because you can think of a whole number as being over 1. And that's going to cancel out the 11 and leave me with X on my left-hand side. And then I'm going to do 24 times 11 and then divide that whole thing by 8. And I will end up with 33. Some of you may have looked at that and said, well, 24 divided by 8 is 3. Could I just reduce that down to start with? Totally. Absolutely, you can. And you'll still get the same answer. Okay, so now I know that X is 33, which is exactly what I figured out when I saw that the zoom factor was going to be a factor of 3. But this is another way that you can solve it if you don't know what the zoom factor is. Okay, so now I am going to repeat this exact same process to help me find Y. So I'm going to start by writing my ratio or my fraction with the corresponding side that goes with Y. And again, I always want to write my variable on the top. It just makes solving a lot easier. So I'm going to say Y over 18. So those were my green highlighted sides. And again, I'm going to set it equal to another ratio from my 2 shapes. And I'm just going to use 8 and 24 again because I can. But this time, Y was in the red. So I need my red sides, so from the red shape, to go in the top. All right, so 8 was also from the red shape. So 8 is going to go in the top this time, and 24 is going to go in the bottom. 24 was from my blue shape, so was 18. So those are from the same shape again. Okay, now I'm going to solve for Y. Y is just dividing, or sorry, 18 is dividing the Y. So I can get rid of the dividing by multiplying. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 18. That'll get rid of my dividing. And I multiply the top of the other fraction by 18. And when I multiply those out, I get 6. So my answer for Y is 6.